Hello, it's me again, the monk of the attack variety. This video's Bible verse is Psalm 119, verse 105. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. That's my wife's favorite verse, so it already gets extra points. But I also like it because sometimes I feel lost, and then I can just turn to God and He lights my path in the way I'm supposed to go. And I need to think about that more often because I feel like there's so many times where I feel lost or alone or like there's nobody that can help me. But then I just need to turn to Him, and then He'll light the way and show me where to go. So it's a pretty comforting verse, and I like it. It brings me, I guess, hope or joy, whatever you want to call it. It helps me feel better. So that's today's verse. Now let's get to the video. I know in the last video I said something about like doing video essays and deep dives into video games, like reviews, and I was like, it'd probably be a while before I do that. So I thought I want to do it right now, and I'd like to introduce you to a new series called The Good, the Bad, the Ugly of blank, whatever game it is. In this particular video, it's going to be about Lords of the Fallen. The background video is going to be an old video that I thought I wasn't going to use. Originally, it was going to be a guide on how to get the Umbral ending in Lords of the Fallen, but for different various reasons that it's just not going to happen. But I figured I could still use the video, so that's what's going to be playing in the background, and I'm just going to do a voiceover. It's just going to be me talking and whatever different background noises this microphone happens to pick up, which hopefully isn't too much. Anyway, this is The Good, the Bad, the Ugly of Lords of the Fallen. Hope you guys enjoy. Right off the bat, I just kind of want to get a couple side notes out of the way, because though this is a review, I just want to make it clear that I love this game. Like, it's nowhere near perfect, but I love it. This game has special events, which I love. I think it's cool that, they care about the game, obviously, so they bring in unique temporary content, which I guess I wish it was permanent, but at the same time I also can appreciate the specialness, the speciality of a temporary event. So I like that they have events in this game. That's one of the things that I like. Another thing that I like a lot is the updates and the support that this game has from the developers. There's bugs, glitches, and stuff like that they're continuously fixing and patching, which I like. I think that's cool, and I appreciate that. It seems like nowadays, a lot of the time, games just kind of come out and they're borderline unplayable, and then they patch them eventually, but this game came out pretty solidly. I don't want to say it was completely solid. They patch and update even the little things, which I think is cool. It gives me mad respect to the developers, especially since like they don't make very many games. It's not like a AAA developer like Activision or anything like that. It seems like they listen to the community a lot. And before I delve into the specific details of the game, if you're just interested in what I give the game out of a 10, I give it a solid 7 out of 10. So if that's all you want to see, we're here. There you go, 7 out of 10. But basically, if you want a more detailed thing, I'm going to talk about the combat, the level and world design, and enemies. Now, a game is like an onion. There's different layers. So the combat will flow into the level and world design, and the level and world design will flow into the enemies.
I ain't too sure that joke works, dawg.
Yeah, that sounded bad, but we're going to keep it. So, first things first. The combat. And first things first, we're going to talk about the good about the combat. Now, is the combat perfect? Absolutely not. It is fast-paced most of the time. I'll get into that later. Most of the time it's fast-paced, and I like fast-paced things. I like Call of Duty. I like older Call of Duties that are a little bit more arcadey. My video on the finals, that game is pretty fast-paced. I like fast-paced stuff. I like the dopamine to just be injected in my eyeballs with needles of unbearable speed. I don't know what I'm saying. I like fast-paced things, and the combat's pretty fast-paced. It is flowy and smooth. It is easy to do combos and easy to change combos. It's not like Bloodborne where you can transform a weapon and then you get a whole new moveset or anything like that. It's not that advanced. You know, you could do like an R1, then R2, or I think there's like an L1 and R2. So I like that there's different combinations that you can do, and it is simple. Don't get me wrong, it is kind of a simple combat system, but there is also a little bit more depth to it than just mashing R1 or mashing R2 or this or that. There's a little bit more to it, and you can combine combos, and it's pretty cool. I enjoy it. It's just kind of fun in general, and I like that. Now, the bad of the combat. Depending on the weapon, it can feel a little stiff. Some weapons are better about it. Mostly weapons with shorter attacks, like one-handed swords, but like heavier weapons like hammers and great swords, which, you know, it makes sense. It does feel a little stiff and a little slow, which doesn't work well with the rest of the game. I'll get into it a little bit more later, but the game is very designed for fast-paced action, which is what I like about the combat. Some weapons aren't built for fast-paced stuff, the bigger ones mostly. It's like they do a lot of damage, but in general, the combat can be stiff and slow compared to what it should be, I think. It can also clash with enemy and also level design. I'll get more into that later. There's more to it than just this is combat, this is level design, this is enemies. It does clash sometimes. Now, the ugly about combat. I'm looking at my script. The ugly, there isn't too much ugly to it. Even though there's not many stuff on paper, it can be pretty bad at times. Animations can just be weird, funky. It's the best way I could describe it. I can give different examples so you can understand more, because it's like, what does weird and funky mean? Don't worry, I'm not going to leave you hanging. Basically, something that's happened to me the most is I'll be doing an attack, I'll like try to heal, the enemy will be attacking me, and I'll be mashing the roll button to try to get away from him, but it has like almost a delay, I guess, because you can't really interrupt your attack animations. And in the time that it took me to do all those inputs, my character just now finished the attack animation, and then he does the healing animation while I'm mashing circle trying to get away. He'll do his healing animation, and then I don't know if the game just gets confused, or if something about the orientation of the character and the camera doesn't match up with what the game thinks it is. But there's been multiple times where after he finished that healing animation, he would just roll in a completely random direction. I say completely random direction, it always just had like the worst direction, either toward an enemy or toward an edge, a ledge, and he would just fly off. And it happened multiple times. I guess it could be partially my fault because I'm just kind of spastic, but at the same time, it's like, you got this fast-paced combat, but you're slowing it down because you can't interrupt these animations. It's like, I don't know if that's something I should get upset about. It's been a long time since I've played other From Software games. Not that this is a FromSoft game, but it's a you know, a Souls-like. That's obvious. And then other FromSoft games, I don't ever remember running into that particular issue, and I am just a spastic when I play that. I don't know if you can interrupt animations, or if you can't, it doesn't do that animation anymore. Like, it doesn't queue up the animations, so it's not like you do the attack, then you heal, then you roll. It's just like you do the attack animation, and then you can try to heal, but then you're still doing the attack animation, and then you're just trying to roll, and then, you know, your character just rolls after the attack animation. It doesn't like queue them up. I don't know if that's what From Software games do, or if you can interrupt the animations. Like I said, it's been a while since I played a From Software game, so those are just my guesses, because I just know that I didn't run into that particular issue that I have in Lords of the Fallen in FromSoft games. That's the biggest thing, is the animations. They can be just weird. They're slow, uninterruptible, and it like queues them up and the game gets confused or something like that. That is probably the worst thing, in my opinion. There is another ugly thing about the combat, which is it always clashes with the level design. It's almost like they built the combat before they built the level design, and then they built the level design and then they just didn't change the combat, almost without fail. It's worse with other weapons. A lot of the times, at least with the weapons I chose to use, I would die from not hitting an enemy and I would be hitting a wall instead. I think what they did is they made these cool weapon animations that they're wide and, you know, kind of like swoopy and whatnot, which is good in a sense. It's not necessarily bad inherently, but the way the levels are designed, it clashes with that. You're going to be hitting walls. Enemies can hit through walls, which that's just a Souls-like staple. The attacks you do are just so wide and whatnot that, like, whenever you're in a small space, which happens often in that game, you're probably gonna die. You're gonna be hitting a wall instead of an enemy. That's just kind of how it is. There's just one particular area that's just like a big open area. I don't want to spoil anything, but there's a boss fight in this particular area. But this particular boss isn't in that area until a certain point in the game. There's normal enemies before the boss decides to pop up in that area later on in the game. And that is probably my favorite area because it is like an arena, pretty much. It's just a big circle arena. Plenty of space. You can use any weapon without fear of hitting a wall, unless if you run into a wall or whatever, and it's awesome. It's like you got this big open space to just swing and kill to your heart's content. Does that make me a psychopath saying that, or at least sound like one? Maybe, but at least I'm honest. That particular area, it stands out to me because I feel like it is the only area that was actually built for the combat, because that's how bad it clashes with the rest of the world design, which happens to lead perfectly into our next area that we're going to dive into. The level and world design. The good about the world and level design. It's a beautiful world. It really is. I love the details and the style of it. I've been wanting to go back and play Dark Souls 3 for a while now. This is probably my favorite Dark Souls. Hot take, I think it's better than Elden Ring.
What did he say?
Hate me if you will. That's just my honest opinion. There's really no game that can scratch that itch for me. I feel like the only time I feel satisfied is if I actually play Dark Souls 3. Even other FromSoft games like Bloodborne just don't do it for me. This game didn't really scratch that itch, but it got the closest to it. You're probably wondering why are you saying all this? I'm wondering why myself. Actually, I have no idea. Just kidding. The reason why is because the level and world design, it's not similar style-wise, but just how everything kind of comes together reminds me a lot of Dark Souls 3. Anyway, other than the aesthetic of the world, I also like the shortcuts. There's a ton of them. I love it. I think it's cool. You go so far into the game, and then you're like, oh, I wonder where this little area leads to, or what this door leads to, or this elevator. And then you activate it, and then you're like, this is at the beginning of the game. I was here like 5 hours ago. It is a very interconnected world. The last good thing is that there's a dual world system. Oh, I can't remember what the living world is called. Hang on. Okay. So there's two worlds. There's Axiom and Umbral. Now, Axiom is the world of the living, and Umbral is the world of the dead. So it's like two worlds in one game. Each world, it shares the same core. Stylistically and aesthetically, they're different. They have a completely different style. There is certain areas that you can only access in Umbral, and the style of it, I love the style of Umbral. It's got a cool purplish, bluish theme going on with it. There's bad of it, of course. For the most part, it's cool. I like the style. It's a little bit edgy, and there's giant, weird statue skeleton things. The edgy teen in me that never left jumps for joy, or jumps for angst whenever I'm in Umbral. Now, the bad of the level and world design. Starting with the shortcuts, there's really no reason for them. There's a robust travel system. It's cool to have the shortcuts, but they're also kind of unnecessary. It feels rewarding for exploring and discovering that. There's not really any shortcuts that take you back to the hub area. There's only one way in, one way out of the hub area. There's really no point for shortcuts. They don't get you back to your hub area. I still think they're cool and I appreciate them. Really, I don't think it would change much for the game if they weren't in there. I'm glad they're in there. I like to explore and discover these secret hidden places that if you did want to go back to a particular area, you know, there's a shortcut for that. But like I said, at the same time, there's plenty of, you know, fast travel locations. You can place a seed and make your own fast travel. You can only have one at a time, but still, some people complain about the shortcuts. I'm happy that they're there. I like them, but they're also kind of pointless because of the fast travel system. And if you want to go to a certain area, it would just be quicker to fast travel. But if you're doing no fast travel run, then, you know, I'm sure you'll appreciate it more than I do. Another bad thing about the world is that it's pretty linear. It is not really an open world game. It's kind of an open level game, if that makes sense, which isn't bad. I mean, I guess it's in the bad. I wish that the game was a little bit less linear. I'm pretty sure there's only like one area, if I remember right, where there's 2 different paths you can take. Okay, so there's 3 different paths technically that you could take. One leads to a shortcut, one path leads to where you're supposed to go, and then you can veer off of that path again that leads to a dead end. So it's like, I don't know, I think of back to like Dark Souls 2, where you're like in the starting area, and then you can go to like 2 or 3 different areas just right off the bat, and that's not really the case for this game. As a matter of fact, there's certain areas that, like, let's say you need to get a key to unlock a door to get to a certain area, and that is in the very beginning of the area, and you know, it's higher level enemies, so if you could access it right off the bat, you'd probably just die immediately because they're higher level enemies. But I almost wish that they just let us be able to access it and learn naturally that if I go this way, I'm gonna die, you know, rather than putting it behind a lock and key, which, I mean, I guess I understand. I'm not completely against it, but I don't know. I just feel like letting people learn naturally about a location or area rather than making them have to unlock it later on. I don't know. It makes the progress feel more like a forced progress rather than just like a natural learning progress, you know? The dual world system, though I enjoy the way they look, how like Umbral looks and Axiom looks, I do dislike certain things about the dual world system. It is kind of forced down your throat a few times, which in a tutorial area, you know, that makes sense. But there's certain locations where the only way to progress is to go into Umbral. It does a little bit less toward the end of the game. Toward the end of the game, it's more like how I prefer it, where it's just kind of like you want to find a secret area or do a secret thing or unlock a secret shortcut or whatever. You need to go into Umbral and do it, which I think it's cool. That's rewarding because they're not telling you to do it. You're just kind of figuring out, oh, I'm going to go into this alternate world to get to a certain location to unlock this in the main world, which I think is awesome. But there is a lot of times where they just force it on you in order to make progress, which I guess they have every right to do. I just prefer it if they didn't, because it's just a little ham-fisted. It makes me enjoy the dual world mechanic less, and it makes me enjoy Umbral less. Which, I mean, there's different reasons why I enjoy Umbral less, but I'll get to that later. Discovering it naturally, I prefer a lot more, but at the same time, I also understand why, because they spend the time putting this mechanic in the game. They're gonna want you to use it, but I digress. And now the ugly. The main ugly thing about the world and level design, and this goes back to the combat, is that the areas, most of them, not all of them, are way too small for the combat style. Back to like hitting the walls and all that stuff, it almost like they're designed by separate people and then they smashed them together and we're like, there you go. Simple fix, honestly, but just to be able to hit through walls, just allow us to phase through them like the enemies do. But at the same time, then it wouldn't be a real Souls-like if they didn't do that. And another thing about the world design that also kind of leads into the enemies, the placement of enemies. There's legit just like enemy traps. Like there's Pilgrim's Perch, that area, there's like at least 2, maybe 3 enemies that are just like placed around a corner, and their attack is to push you off the edge of the cliff. And that's literally the whole purpose of them. And then another thing about the enemies, this is almost exclusive to Umbral. There's too many of them. It's not completely exclusive to Umbral, but it is far more noticeable in Umbral. There's too many enemies, which complements the combat. Because you have these big sweeping motions, most of the attacks are fast, but because you're in a tiny area where you hit walls instead of enemies, you got like 20 enemies surrounding you and you're sack tapping a wall. It's not the best scenario to be in. Speaking of enemies, let's get into the good and the bad and the ugly of the enemies. The good. Most of the boss fights are pretty dang fun. They're a bit basic, yes. Some of them are fairly easy and simple, but I still enjoy them. They're cool. They're a spectacle. That's what a boss fight is supposed to be. Like I said, most of them. Enemy design is... I love the style of this game. The aesthetic of this game is dope. D-O-P-E. But the enemies look cool. They're this like cool visceralness. Like, that doesn't make sense at all, but that's the best way I can think to describe them. Is like it's dark, it's grungy, it's visceral. And that isn't just exclusive to the enemies, it's also the world. But the enemies really are just like, you look at some of these people and you're like, that's crazy. How did an artist even make this? It's an insane looking enemy, where it's a cool looking detailed enemy. And especially some of the bosses, they have these awesome designs. They knock them out of the park really with the designs. I don't think I have a complaint with the design. You know, some people might not like it because they all can kind of seem samey sometimes, but I don't have an issue with them. I think they're all cool. Now, the bad. Though they look cool, there is not very much variety between the enemies. A matter of fact, I saw a video that I think there's only 7 different enemy types. I could be remembering wrong, so don't hold it against me if I am. Different areas have different looking enemies. They're the same enemy, but they're just reskinned, which I guess normally I wouldn't mind, but it's just with that small of amount of enemy, you know, it can get stale kind of quickly, because it's just kind of fighting the same enemy over and over again. Even though they look different, it's still it can get stale. And I hate the dog enemies, just dog enemies in general. In any Souls-like game, I hate them. Even in Bloodborne, they're less egregious due to the speed of your character and whatnot. So side tangent over. Another thing is that most of the bosses end up becoming normal enemies. There's like main bosses that are the main big hunky boys and girls that they're important basically. New enemy types are introduced as bosses, so it's like you'll fight a boss and then they just become a normal enemy type in the next room where you're fighting like 2 or 3 of them. It's already kind of stale because there's not very many enemy variety, but it's like you find a new enemy and it's like, this used to be a boss. It's just significantly weaker now. It's like whenever you unlock Minion in Twisted Metal Black, he's like this big dude with like a shield and everything when you fight him, and then you unlock him and you're like half his size and no shield in sight. That's kind of what it's like, a downgraded version of a boss fight. I wish they were a little bit more creative with the bosses, because at least I'd say probably 80% of the bosses are just things that become normal enemies. The first boss that you fight in the tutorial becomes a normal enemy. You don't even realize that you're technically fighting not a boss, you're fighting a normal enemy that's just a little bit stronger, and they're calling it a boss. It's not the worst thing either, I guess, but I just wish they were a little bit more creative with the bosses and the enemies, for sure. Another bad thing about the enemies, I guess it's more specific to the bosses. A lot of the bosses will have forced invincible sections. Light Reaper, he's like the first boss after the tutorial boss. That's like, if you lose to him, it's fine. You can still progress. You do a certain amount of damage to him, and then he'll call his dragon and fly away or whatever. And that's just one example, but there is a lot of bosses that's like, you could kill them in like 2 or 3 hits. Let's say, you know, you get a boss down to half health, and you're still hitting them, but they're doing some like animation that just doesn't let you do damage to them, where they fly away, or they disappear, or they go underground, or this and that. And I understand it, but certain bosses, like, they're just straight up still there. They're just doing an invincible animation or whatever. You're doing something that should be doing massive amounts of damage, but because they're floating and spinning around, you're not doing any damage to them. Their health bar isn't going down at all. There's one boss, the Hush Saint boss battle. It was kind of cool because he would go underground. You know, obviously you couldn't attack him, so it was an invincible section, and then he would hop up, attack you, then go back underground or whatever, which I don't think this is particularly spoilery. I think it's like one of the first areas you go to. So he can pop up, and if you hit him with an attack or hit him with magic, I think something, you can knock him off of his horse and attack him. So it's cool because it's kind of interruptible. There is a lot of uninterruptible boss attacks, which I get, you know, bosses are supposed to be strong, so I don't know if it's necessarily a bad thing, but I did notice it and it did get on my nerves. Now, the ugly. There's too many. It's a gank fest. It's literally a gank fest. There's too many enemies, they're too close together, they're too cluttered in a small area. Even just like cannon fodder enemies, they do a massive amount of damage. So when you're surrounded by like literally double digits of enemies and you're hitting a wall and they're hitting you, you're gonna die in like 2 seconds. Even with like a high level character, it's kind of crazy, especially for how the game is designed. It works against itself. It's pretty dang hard. The challenge comes from trying to work around the hiccups of the game, not from the game itself, if that makes sense. Most of the bosses, kind of also a gank fest. The Hollow Crow is really cool. The crow itself, the art style, the style of the enemy is awesome. One of the cooler ones in my opinion. Problem is that you don't fight it. You fight like a ghost woman that appears every now and again. Back to those Forest Invincible sections. You do a certain amount of damage and she disappears, and then you basically just need to survive getting attacked by a bunch of ads. Just a bunch of random enemies. It's probably the example that describes it perfectly of all the like bad and worst things about the combat. You do a certain amount of damage, you can't do any more damage to the boss, and then a bunch of enemies just spawn in. There's icicles and ice crystals that are slowing you down, cut your stamina in half, do you damage to you, and you gotta watch out for regular enemies, and enemies that used to be bosses are now here as an ad. It's a shame because it was such a cool looking boss, and then you don't even fight the boss, you fight like a ghost, and then you fight regular enemies that used to be bosses. That's probably the most egregious thing about the game, that boss fight, because you want to love it because it's so cool, but then there's all the bad stuff. I think that is the worst things about the enemies. The worst and the best things about the enemies, and maybe just the game in general, is the bosses. That's pretty much all I have to say. I'm kind of going off script. Might ramble for a little bit. I don't really want to end on a bad note, which I guess is kind of bound to happen because the ugly is the last thing that I talk about. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I love this game. I played through it almost 10 times probably. Now granted, that was because I did New Game Zero rather than New Game Plus, but the developers actually thought about adding that as an option. I don't know if any other game has done that. You keep all your upgrades, but nothing gets harder or anything like that. So maybe I just like an easy game. I thought that was really cool. The developers, I have a lot of respect for the developers actually, because of the events, them listening to the community, the updates, the stuff that they add, you don't even need to pay for. I'm so used to like paying for a season pass, like in Call of Duty or something like that, paying for a season pass and then you get this extra content and this and then that, and then they're just adding stuff. They're not asking for any more money. They do plan on releasing DLC. I want to make that clear. I don't know all the details about it. Obviously, it's been a decent amount of time since I've played this game. The developers really care. They are passionate about this game, and that's something that not a whole lot of modern games have. I think the best part of the game actually is the love that the developers showed toward it and the community. I like how you can become this crazy overpowered character and just start a new game and still be a crazy overpowered character, because it makes it easy to get like trophies and easy to explore and get items that you might have missed. Whenever I give a 1 to 10 scale of a game, it's like 1, garbage, don't buy it. 5, kind of basic, middle of the road, and then, you know, 10 is like must buy. So, I mean, giving it a 7 out of 10, maybe I'm just sort of a snob toward games, because there's not many games that I think I'd give a 10 out of 10 to, honestly. Even with all the issues I have with the game, because really, if you think about it and look at it, the issues that I have are kind of core to the game. The world, the combat, the enemies, they're the backbone of the game. So the fact that even with all these issues that I have with it, I still give it a 7 out of 10, they are doing something right. They did something right with this game, and the developers are continuing to do right with it. There's an armor that I can't remember if I was wearing it in the video that's on screen, but there's this armor that it was all glitched out, and I was like, oh, they're probably not going to fix it. And I was like, I guess I don't really care. It still looks cool, even though it looks weird when I'm going up and down a ladder or something. But there was an update, and they fixed it. They're fixing even the smallest things. It's just like an armor not having physics, pretty much. And the events that they do and the updates that they're adding, they have a roadmap. Unless if I'm mistaken, it's all free. You're only going to have to worry about paying for the DLC, which I will do gladly whenever it comes out. That's how much I like the game, even with the issues I have of it. So even though there is a lot of bad and a lot of ugly to this game, it's still a great game. If you're looking for a Souls-like game and maybe Remnant just isn't cutting it for you, or you beat Remnant, or Mortal Shell is not for you or something like that, or I'm just trying to think of any other Souls-like games that are kind of around right now. If you're wanting a new Souls-like experience, maybe you don't feel like going back to any of the Dark Souls or Bloodborne, or you just beat Elden Ring or something like that, for real, give this game a try. You'll get frustrated because of things I mentioned, but if you're anything like me, you'll still love and enjoy the game and want to play through it and want to be a completionist, get every item, get every ending. You'll like this game if you're anything like me. There's people out there that bash on it and say it's a bad game and they hate it and to never play it, which honestly, whenever I first started the game, that's kind of how I felt. But then I just pushed through, and even though there were issues that I had with it that it continued to carry through with me through the whole playthrough, I fell in love with the game. It's great, it's awesome, and I think people should buy it and give it a try. You know, obviously it isn't for everybody, but I also think if you like that kind of game, you're missing out on a pretty solid experience. Not to mention they added golden buckets. You can dual wield golden buckets and punch people with buckets. That's what you have to look forward to, really, is the support of the developers and cool stuff that's just free. They even added new spells just for no reason. But yeah, that's about it. That's the good, the bad, and the ugly of Lords of the Fallen. Hope you guys enjoyed. Don't know if you're watching this at night. If you are, good night. Watching this in the morning, hope you have a good day. I will catch you guys on the next video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you guys enjoyed. If you guys want prayers or anything like that, I'll pray for you. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll catch you later. Bye. Oh, it's gonna be fun to edit. 3, 2, 1.